There is a moment in every person's life where they say one honest thing, just one, and the people who were supposed to love them most look back with eyes full of strangers. For Marcus Reid, that moment happened in a law office on a Tuesday morning. He was 31 years old, sitting in a gray chair with a paper cup of cold coffee in his hand, listening to a lawyer read numbers out loud that did not feel real. $7 billion. The man who had left it all was gone. And the word Marcus said, the one quiet, honest word, cost him the only family he had ever known. His mother stood up and pointed at him. His father turned his back and walked out of the room. His brother looked at him like something that had crawled in from outside. And for 22 seconds, nobody in that room said anything at all. Marcus did not cry. He just sat there and watched the door swing shut behind the people who had raised him. He had been erased from that family 100 different ways before that day. But that Tuesday was the day it became official. Before we go any further, I want you to stay with Marcus Reid on this one, because what is about to unfold is not just about money or inheritance. It is about how long a person can be invisible inside the family that is supposed to see them most clearly. Think about whether you have ever told the truth to someone who loved you and had them treat that truth like a weapon you aimed at them. Think about what you would have done in that gray chair. Stay with it. This story goes deep. Marcus Reid grew up in a house that looked fine from the outside. The lawn was cut every Saturday. The car in the driveway was never more than 3 years old. His mother Diane made dinner at 6 every evening and expected everyone to be seated. His father Gerald wore collared shirts even on weekends and believed that how things appeared was at least as important as how things were. They were not cruel people in the way that word usually gets used. They never raised a hand to Marcus or his older brother Elliot. They kept the lights on and the refrigerator full. But there was a particular kind of coldness in that house that Marcus spent most of his childhood trying to name and could not, until he was old enough to understand that love without warmth is just management. Elliot was the one they warmed to. That was simply true, and Marcus had accepted it young. Elliot was louder, more confident, funnier at the dinner table. He had their father's jaw and their mother's laugh and something in between that made adults lean toward him at family gatherings like he was giving off light. Marcus was quieter. He read books that nobody else in the house cared about. He asked questions that made Gerald impatient. He noticed things, the way his parents' conversation warmed up when Elliot walked into a room, the way they summarized his school reports with a single nod while Elliot's were read aloud and celebrated. He noticed, and he filed it away, and he tried to be easier to love. He tried for a long time. He got good grades not because anyone pushed him, but because it was the only area where he felt like his efforts produced something real. He stayed out of trouble while Elliot moved in and out of it with the casual confidence of someone who knew the rules did not apply to him the same way. Marcus covered for Elliot twice. Once when Elliot borrowed money from their father's desk drawer, and once when he dented the car and needed someone to absorb the story differently. Marcus did both. He was 17 the first time and 19 the second, and both times his parents were grateful in the vague way people are grateful for rain. They did not say much. They moved on, and so did he. The person who saw Marcus most clearly was not in his family at all. His name was Harlan Reeves, and he was their maternal great-uncle, their grandmother's younger brother. And he lived alone in a house outside of town that smelled like old paper and coffee grounds and something warm that Marcus could never identify. Harlan had been a quiet success. He had built a logistics and freight company in the 1970s, grown it steadily through the 1980s and 1990s, sold divisions at the right times, made careful investments, and by the time Marcus knew him was simply a man who wore old clothes and read every newspaper he could get his hands on and had more money than anyone in the family fully understood. He never talked about it. He drove a 12-year-old truck. He heated soup from a can and ate it standing over the sink. Marcus started visiting Harlan when he was 16. It began because his mother asked him to check on Harlan after a mild health scare, and Marcus drove out there expecting an awkward hour. Instead, he found a man who asked him questions and then actually listened to the answers. Harlan wanted to know what Marcus thought about things, not what he scored on a test or what sport he planned to try next. What did he think the way cities were planned? What did he think happened to people when they stopped being curious? What did he think the difference was between being careful and being afraid? Marcus had never been asked those questions by anyone. He answered them carefully, and Harlan nodded, and Marcus drove home feeling like a door had been opened somewhere inside him. He kept going back, every few weeks through high school and then more regularly once he was in college studying business and economics at a state university 3 hours from home. He would call ahead, drive out, and spend an afternoon with Harlan. They talked about everything. Business, history, family, human nature, what made people break and what made them hold. Harlan had sharp opinions and no patience for comfortable lies. He said once that most families were not built on love as much as they were built on the management of disappointment, and Marcus had written that sentence in a notebook and carried it with him for years. His parents knew he visited Harlan. They did not fully understand it. Diane thought it was nice. In the distracted way she approved of things Marcus did not require her attention. Gerald once said he hoped Marcus was not bothering the old man. Elliot, who had visited Harlan exactly once as a teenager and found the experience unbearable, told Marcus that he was wasting his Saturdays. Marcus said nothing. He kept going. Harlan got older and quieter in his last few years, but his mind stayed clear. He had no children of his own. He had been married once briefly before Marcus was born, and he did not talk about it except to say that he had not been ready to be known by anyone at the time, and that it had cost him something he could not replace. He seemed to have arranged his life carefully around that absence. He had the company, then he had the space that came after the company, and he had his books and his newspapers and his kitchen table conversations with Marcus. When Harlan died, Marcus was 31. It was a January, the kind that comes down flat and gray and stays. Harlan had passed in his sleep, which his doctor said was about as kind an exit as the body could arrange. The funeral was small. Most of Harlan's contemporaries were already gone, and the family connection was thin enough that only a handful of people made the drive. Marcus stood at the graveside and felt the specific grief of losing someone who had known him clearly, which is different from ordinary loss and much harder to explain. 3 weeks after the funeral, a letter arrived informing Marcus that he was expected at the offices of Harlan's legal firm for the reading of the will. He assumed this meant Harlan had left him something, a book maybe, or a piece of furniture, or one of the old maps that had hung in the hallway. He told his mother, who told Gerald, who told Elliot, and suddenly all three of them were planning to attend as well. Marcus did not object. He did not think much about it. He drove to the office on a Tuesday morning and poured himself a cup of coffee from a machine in the waiting area and sat down in a gray chair and waited. The lawyer's name was Mr. Aldous Fenn, and he was a careful, compact man with reading glasses he kept removing and replacing. He arranged his papers with the deliberateness of someone who understood that what he was about to say would change the shape of the room. Diane sat straight in her chair. Gerald kept his arms crossed. Elliot scrolled his phone until Fenn gave him a look, and then he put it face down on his knee. Marcus held his coffee cup and looked at the window. Fenn read through the document with the steady pace of a man who had done this hundreds of times. There were bequests to 2 charitable organizations Harlan had supported for decades. There was a sum left to a former employee who had stayed loyal through a difficult period in the company. There were small amounts distributed to a few distant relatives. And then Fenn paused, adjusted his glasses, and said that the entirety of the remaining estate, including all investment holdings, property interests, liquidated assets, and the residual trust, was to be transferred to Marcus Reid as the sole primary beneficiary. The number was just over $7 billion. The room went completely quiet. Marcus heard his mother breathe in. He heard Elliot shift in his chair. He looked at his hands and then at Mr. Fenn, who was looking back at him with the neutral expression of a man paid to deliver information without opinion. Marcus said the only word that came to him. He said it quietly, without drama, the way you say something when the truth of it is bigger than any performance you could attach to it. He said, okay. That was the word. That was the single honest syllable that cost him everything. His mother turned to look at him like she was seeing someone she did not recognize. His father uncrossed his arms and recrossed them in the other direction. Anand said nothing. Elliot stared at the side of Marcus's face for a long moment and then looked at the floor. And then his mother said in a voice that was very controlled and very cold, "You knew." It was not a question, it was an accusation. She meant that Marcus had known about the will, had cultivated Harlan deliberately, had manipulated an old lonely man into leaving him everything, had done all of this quietly and carefully while the rest of the family remained in the dark. Marcus said he had not known about the will. He had never asked Harlan about his money. The visits were not about anything except the visits themselves. Diane said that nobody spent 15 years visiting an old man every month for no reason. Gerald stood up. He did not shout. Gerald was not a shouting man, but he said in a voice like a door closing, "You sat in that house all those years and said nothing to any of us, not one word. You kept this quiet and called it being close to him." He picked up his coat from the back of the chair. He looked at Marcus one time directly, with something in his eyes that Marcus had never seen there before, something that might have been fury, or might have been shame pretending to be fury. And then he walked out of the office. Elliot went next. He stood and looked at Marcus and said in a low voice that only Marcus could hear, "I hope it was worth it." Then he was gone. Diane was the last to leave. She stood at the door with her hand on the frame and turned back once. She said, "You always needed to be chosen, didn't you, Marcus?" And then she left as well, and the door swung shut, and Marcus sat in the gray chair in the quiet office with Mr. Fenn across the desk, and the number 7 billion sitting in the room between them like something that had been dropped from a great height. Mr. Fenn cleared his throat gently and asked if Marcus had any questions about the transfer process. Marcus said no. Then he said yes, actually, did Harlan leave any letters or personal notes? Fenn said yes, there was a sealed letter with Marcus's name on it, and he produced it from a folder. Marcus put it in his inside coat pocket without opening it. He thanked Fenn. He stood up. He walked out into the January air and sat in his car in the parking lot for 11 minutes without moving. Then he drove home. He opened the letter that night at his kitchen table. Harlan had typed it, which felt right. He had always preferred typing to handwriting because, he once said, handwriting makes excuses for itself. The letter was 3 paragraphs long. The first paragraph said that Marcus had been the person Harlan most trusted to do something honest with what he was leaving behind. Because Harlan had spent enough years watching what money did to people who measured their worth by how much of it they could accumulate, and Marcus was the only person in his orbit who had never seemed to think that way. The second paragraph said that Harlan knew the rest of the family would not understand, and that he was sorry in advance for any storm Marcus would have to weather, but that he believed Marcus had the steadiness for it. The third paragraph was only one sentence. It said, "The visits were the best part of my later years, and I want you to know that." Marcus folded the letter and put it back in its envelope. He held it for a moment. Then he set it on the table and went to bed. He did not sleep for a long time. The calls started the next morning. Not from his family, from extended relatives and people connected to the family in various orbits who had somehow already heard. A cousin Marcus barely knew texted to say congratulations and that they should catch up soon. An aunt on his father's side called and asked Marcus if it was true, and when Marcus confirmed it was, began listing her various financial pressures in a tone that was not quite asking for anything but was absolutely asking for something. Marcus was polite. He said he needed time to think. He ended the calls. His mother did not call for 4 days. When she did, her voice was different from the one she had used in the lawyer's office, softer, more careful, calibrated toward a conversation rather than a verdict. She said that things had gotten emotional in that room and that she hoped Marcus understood. She said that it had been a shock. She said that she was sure Harlan had his reasons and that of course the family was happy for Marcus. She paused. And then she said she hoped that Marcus would remember, now that he was in this position, that family was the most important thing. That they had raised him. That everything he was had come from the foundation they had provided. Marcus listened to all of it. When she was done, he asked her one question. He asked her what she thought the word okay had communicated to her in that office. Why had it made her assume he had known when the truth was he had simply been too full of grief and shock to say anything more elaborate? His mother said she didn't think this was the time to relitigate that moment. Marcus said he thought it was exactly the time, because if they were going to talk about going forward, he wanted to understand what had just happened first. Diane said she would call him later in the week. She did not call later in the week. Elliot called 11 days after the reading. He was more direct than their mother, which was one of the few things Marcus had always respected about him. Elliot said he was not going to pretend he was not upset because he was upset, and he said he thought it was wrong that Harlan had chosen one grandnephew over the other without any apparent reason except preference. Marcus pointed out that Harlan was their great-uncle, not their grandfather. Elliot said that was beside the point. Marcus asked what the point was. Elliot said the point was that Marcus had gotten something that should have gone to the family as a whole, and that some kind of acknowledgement of that was appropriate. Marcus said, acknowledgement meaning what exactly? Elliot said that he was not asking for anything specific right now, and that he just needed Marcus to understand his position. Marcus understood his position very clearly, but he said he would think about it. Then he ended the call and went for a walk because he needed air, and he needed the particular clarity that comes from moving through cold space without anyone else's voice in your ear. The days that followed were strange in the way that major life changes always are not dramatic exactly, but altered in texture. Marcus still woke up at his usual time. He still made his own coffee. He still drove the same car and ate at the same small table in his apartment. But Mr. Fenn had begun the formal process of transferring Harlan's estate, which meant paperwork and meetings, and a team of attorneys and advisors whose entire professional purpose was suddenly to be helpful to Marcus Reid. It felt foreign. Not unwelcome, but foreign, like wearing someone else's coat that happened to fit. He hired a personal attorney separate from Harlan's estate attorneys, a woman named Josephine Tallies who came recommended through 2 independent contacts and who had a reputation for working with people who were navigating inheritance situations that had become complicated by family. She was direct and unhurried and had a way of letting silence sit in the room until Marcus finished his thought, which he appreciated. He told her the full story over 2 meetings. She listened without interrupting. When he was done, she said, "The most important thing you can do right now is not make any commitments under emotional pressure." He said he understood. She said, "I mean to anyone, including yourself." He asked her what she meant by that last part. She said that people in his position sometimes felt so guilty about receiving something unexpected that they gave it away in ways that created problems later, not because generosity was wrong, but because guilt is not a good financial advisor. Marcus said he did not feel particularly guilty. She said that was good and that they should keep it that way. Gerald's silence lasted 3 weeks. Then Marcus received an email from his father, not a call, an email, which told him something about how Gerald wanted to manage the distance between them. The email was written in the formal style Gerald used when he was being careful, with full sentences and no contractions. It said that Gerald had been thinking a great deal about recent events and that he believed the situation called for a clear-headed family conversation. He said that he did not believe Marcus had acted with ill intent, but that the outcome created an imbalance that the family needed to address together. He said he hoped Marcus would agree to a dinner at the house so that they could speak in person. Marcus read the email twice. Then he forwarded it to Josephine Tallies with a single line. "What do you think this actually is?" she wrote back within the hour. "It is an invitation to a room where you will be the only person without a prepared position." Marcus wrote back, "So should I go?" She wrote, "That is entirely your call, but go knowing what it is." He drove to the house he had grown up in on a Saturday evening in February, with the porch light on and the same car in the driveway and the smell of his mother's cooking reaching him before he even opened the front door. Some things were designed to feel like home whether they deserved to or not. He knew this. He went in anyway. The dinner was civil on the surface. His mother had made the meal she always made for occasions she considered important: pot roast and roasted vegetables and bread she had bought from the bakery and warmed in the oven. Elliot was there, and Elliot's wife Carla, who had always been pleasant to Marcus in the way people are pleasant to someone they have categorized as harmless. They talked about general things. Through the first part of the meal, weather, a relative's health situation, a neighborhood development someone had opinions about. Then, over the clearing of plates, Gerald set down his napkin and said that he thought it was time to speak directly. He said that he loved Marcus, and that love was the basis of everything he was about to say. He said that the inheritance had created a situation where Marcus now had resources that the rest of the family did not, and that this was not Marcus's fault, but that it created an obligation, a family obligation, to ensure that the benefits were shared in a way that reflected how families were supposed to work. He said that Elliot had been building his business for several years now and was at a critical point where a capital investment could make a significant difference. He said that Diane had spoken about a property she had always hoped to own, something outside the city, something with space. He said he himself was looking at retirement in the next few years and had concerns about whether what he had saved would be sufficient. He said all of this calmly, with the measured pace of a man who had prepared the speech. And when he was done, he folded his hands on the table and looked at Marcus and waited. Marcus looked back at him. He did not feel the thing he had expected to feel, which was anger. What he felt was something quieter and more final, the particular sadness of watching someone you love reduce an entire relationship down to what they can extract from it. He thought about Harlan's letter. He thought about what Harlan had written about trusting Marcus to do something honest with what he was leaving behind. He thought about the gray chair in the lawyer's office. He thought about his mother's voice saying, "You always needed to be chosen, didn't you, Marcus?" He said, "I appreciate you being direct, Dad." Gerald gave a small nod, as if that was the beginning of agreement. Marcus said, "I am not going to make any financial commitments right now. Not because I don't love this family, but because I think this conversation would have gone very differently if the number in that room had been smaller." The table went quiet. Elliot looked at Carla. Diane looked at the centerpiece. Marcus continued. He said he had thought a lot about the visits to Harlan over the years and about why nobody else in the family had made them. He was not saying it to be cruel. He was saying it because he thought the answer to that question explained something important about the situation they were all in now. He said he was not going to make decisions about $7 billion at a dinner table while the pot roast was still warm. He said he needed more time and he needed to think, and he hoped they could all respect that. His father said, "We are not strangers asking for a donation, Marcus. We are your family." Marcus said, "I know that. That's exactly why I am being honest with you instead of telling you what you want to hear." He stayed through dessert because leaving immediately felt like its own kind of performance. His mother served apple cake and said almost nothing. Elliot made one attempt at lightening the mood with a story about something that had happened at his office, and everyone laughed in the thin way people laugh when they are mostly relieved to have somewhere to put their face. Marcus drove home through the dark with the heater on and the radio off and his hands steady on the wheel. In the weeks that followed, the family tried several more approaches. Diane sent him an article about the psychological effects of sudden wealth and enclosed a note saying she hoped he was taking care of himself. Elliot texted asking if Marcus wanted to meet for lunch, and when Marcus agreed, spent 45 minutes of the meal presenting a business plan for his company that concluded with a specific ask for $2.5 million as a loan, presented with documents he had clearly prepared with professional help. Marcus read the documents carefully, asked several specific questions about the projected returns, and said he would think about it. Elliot said he needed an answer by the end of the month. Marcus said he understood the timeline. The end of the month came. Marcus called Josephine Tallies and walked through the business plan with her. She said the plan had real structural problems and that the projected returns were optimistic to a degree that would concern any reasonable investor. She said that was her professional read, but that the final decision was his. Marcus said he appreciated that. Then he called Elliot and said he had reviewed everything carefully and that he was not going to provide the funding at this time, but that he was happy to connect Elliot with some advisors who could help him refine the plan for other investors. Elliot's response was not calm. He said that Marcus had always resented him and that this was simply the first time Marcus had the power to do anything about it. He said that Harlan had clearly been manipulated by someone who had spent 15 years building a case for exactly this outcome. He said that Marcus should think very carefully about what he was doing to the family. His voice was steady and sharp in the way that voices get when anger has been rehearsed. Marcus said, "I'm not going to argue about Harlan. What I know is that he spent years having honest conversations with someone who showed up, and he made a decision. I had nothing to do with what he wrote in that will." Elliot said Marcus could tell himself whatever he needed to. Marcus said goodbye and ended the call. He sat in his apartment afterward and looked at the wall for a while. Not because he was devastated, the call had not surprised him, but because there was a particular exhaustion that came with proving over and over again that you were not the person someone else had decided you were. It did not matter how many times he answered clearly. Elliot had already written the story of Marcus as the scheming younger brother, and that story served too many of Elliot's needs to be revised. The more public situation began in late March. Elliot's wife, Carla, posted something on her social media that did not mention Marcus by name but was clearly about him. A long caption about the pain of watching family choose money over blood, about the cruelty of inherited favoritism, about what happened when someone used proximity to a vulnerable elderly person to position themselves for gain. She used phrases like "chosen over us," and "we were never enough for him," and concluded by saying she was processing grief she had not expected. The post got significant engagement. People who did not know Marcus at all left supportive comments about the unfairness of inheritance situations and the damage that one selfish family member could do. Marcus saw the post because someone in his extended network forwarded it to him. He read it twice. He did not respond publicly. He took a screenshot. He sent it to Josephine Tallies and said, "Is this something I should be concerned about?" She called him rather than writing back and said that public characterizations like this, while unpleasant, were generally not legally actionable on their own, but that he should keep records of everything in the event that the situation escalated. She also said, "You have more resources now than most people in this situation have. Use them carefully. The best response to something like this is usually to become undeniable." He thought about what she meant by undeniable for a long time afterward. In April, he made his first public decision about the estate. He had been working quietly with Harlan's former chief of staff, a woman named Denise Pryor who had worked with Harlan for 22 years and knew the business and charitable interests in detail, to develop a plan for the foundation Harlan had long discussed but never formally established. It was a logistics education and workforce development initiative, targeting communities with high youth unemployment and limited access to trade training. Marcus had spent 6 weeks reviewing the existing charitable frameworks, talking to people working in the field, and working with legal and financial advisors to structure something that could operate at scale with genuine accountability. He named it the Reeves Foundation, after Harlan's surname, because it was Harlan's values and Harlan's money, and Marcus had no interest in putting his own name on someone else's legacy. The announcement was quiet, a press release from the foundation's communications team, a short statement from Marcus that he had reviewed word by word, and a formal partnership with 3 established workforce organizations who had agreed to serve as inaugural program partners. He did not do interviews. He did not post personally about it. The story got picked up by a regional business publication and then by a couple of national outlets that covered philanthropy and workforce issues. It was not a front-page moment. It was the kind of thing that people who paid attention to such things would notice, and the kind of thing that people who did not pay attention to such things would miss entirely. Carla's social media post got a second wave of engagement in response, because some of the people who had commented supportively had now also seen the foundation news and reconsidered their read on the situation. A few of them went back to the original post and left new comments. A few more found the original post and left less sympathetic responses. Carla deleted the post 4 days after the foundation announcement. Marcus did not celebrate this. He noticed it. There was a difference. His mother called in early May. Her voice had shifted again, this time towards something that sounded more genuine, or at least more uncertain, which in Diane was sometimes the same thing. She said she had seen the foundation news and that she thought it was a good thing. Marcus thanked her. She said she had also been thinking about a lot of things over the past few months and that she wanted to tell him something. He said he was listening. She said that she had not always been fair to him when he was growing up. She said she thought she had let certain habits of attention develop in the family that were not equitable, and that she did not think she had fully seen that until recently. She said she was sorry for how she had spoken to him in the lawyer's office and for the things she had implied about his relationship with Harlan. Marcus sat with this for a moment. It was more than he had expected, and it was less than he needed, and it was real in a way that he had not anticipated from his mother. He said, "I appreciate that, Mom, I mean that." She asked if they could have lunch sometime. He said yes, they could do that. She asked if he was going to help Elliot with the business. He said no, not in the way Elliot had asked, but that he had sent Elliot a referral to a legitimate business advisor who could help him structure his company properly for outside investment. Diane said she understood. Then she said she hoped Marcus and Elliot could find their way back to each other eventually. Marcus said he hoped so too, but that it would take more than hope. It would take Elliot being willing to see the situation clearly, and he could not control that from his side. Lunch with his mother happened 3 weeks later at a restaurant she chose in the neighborhood she had always preferred. It was a little awkward and a little warm and ultimately a little of both at the same time, which felt true to their history. She told him about her week. He told her about his. She asked about the foundation work. He explained some of it. She said Harlan had always seemed like a smart man. Marcus agreed. She said she was sorry she had never known him better. Marcus said he thought Harlan would have appreciated that. He drove home from that lunch and sat with the feeling of it, which was complicated in the specific way that family is always complicated when it is trying to do better and doing so imperfectly. He had not forgiven everything. He was not sure forgiveness was the right frame for what had happened. What he knew was that he had not collapsed under the weight of it, and he had not hardened into someone unrecognizable, and he had not let the $7 billion make him a different person in the ways that money sometimes made people different. He had kept himself. In June, something happened that he had not anticipated. He received a letter, an actual paper letter, forwarded through the estate attorneys from a woman named Clara Voss who had worked as a caretaker for Harlan in his last 18 months. She said she had read about the foundation and wanted to share something she thought Marcus should know. She said that in those last months when she was with Harlan every day, he had talked about Marcus often, not about the will or the money, about Marcus himself. He had described Marcus as someone who listened when other people performed and who showed up when other people forgot. He had said that Marcus reminded him of who he had hoped to be when he was young, and that watching Marcus become the person he was had been one of the quiet privileges of his final years. She had written the letter, she said, because she thought Marcus might need to hear it. She was not asking for anything. Marcus read the letter 3 times. He wrote back to Clara Voss, a careful, genuine letter that took him 2 drafts, and thanked her for sending it. He told her it had arrived at a moment when he needed to hear exactly that which was true. He added Clara's letter to the envelope with Harlan's original note. He put both in a fireproof box on the shelf in his closet, not as evidence of anything, as a record of what was real. By the summer, the texture of his life had changed in ways both practical and quiet. He had moved out of his apartment into a house, not a conspicuous one, not the kind of house people drove slowly past, but one with a back garden and a room he could use for the work he was doing with the foundation, and enough space that he did not feel like the walls were closing in. He still made his own coffee. He still drove a modest car, though he had bought a newer one for the first time in several years. He ran in the mornings, he read in the evenings. He had lunch with his mother approximately once a month. He spoke to his father rarely. Gerald was still operating in a kind of stiff, proud silence that Marcus recognized as Gerald's version of processing, but the calls, when they happened, were civil. Elliot had not reached out since the day Marcus declined the funding. Marcus had sent one text in April checking in, and Elliot had responded with a single word, "Fine." That was the full extent of their contact for months. Marcus thought about this sometimes not. With the hollow ache he might have expected, but with something more like clarity. He had loved Elliot in the complicated way you love someone who you know has always seen you as a supporting character in a story where they are the lead. He had covered for Elliot. He had made space for Elliot. He had understood Elliot's silences and absorbed Elliot's entitlement with the patience of someone who had decided that keeping the peace was worth what it cost. He was not angry at any of that anymore. He was simply done paying that particular price. In August, Elliot's business ran into the structural problems that Josephine Tallies had identified months earlier. The company had been growing too fast on too narrow a margin, and a key client relationship collapsed, and Elliot was suddenly looking at a cash crisis that had no clean solutions. He called Marcus for the first time in 4 months. His voice was different from any version Marcus had heard before. Not the rehearsed anger of the post-reading phone call, not the smooth confidence of the pot roast dinner, not the controlled sharpness of the business plan conversation. He sounded like someone standing in a room where the walls had just moved. He said he needed help. He said he knew he had said things that were unfair. He said that what he had said about Harlan was wrong and he knew it. He said he did not know where else to turn. He said Marcus was his brother. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I know you're in a hard spot. I'm not going to pretend I don't hear that." Elliot said he needed capital, and he needed it within 30 days or the business would not survive in its current form. He gave a number. Marcus said, "I'm not going to give you capital, I've told you that, but I'll make you one call today to someone who specializes in restructuring businesses in exactly this kind of situation. He's expensive, but he's worth it. Whether you take that call or not is up to you. I'll tell him to expect to hear from you." Elliot said, "That's it, that's what you're offering." Marcus said, "That's what I'm offering." There was a pause, then Elliot said, "Fine," and that was all. The restructuring specialist Marcus referred was good. Elliot called him. The business did not survive in its current form. It was broken down and rebuilt in a smaller, leaner version that was actually viable. Elliot lost some of what he had built in terms of scale, but he kept the core. Marcus heard about this from his mother, not from Elliot. Elliot did not call to say thank you for the referral. Marcus did not expect him to. September brought the Foundation's first formal program launch in 2 cities. Marcus attended both events quietly, standing toward the back watching. He had not become a person who liked the front of rooms. He watched the program coordinators talk about what they were building. He watched young people ask questions about the training pathways. He watched Denise Pryor handle the operational details with the calm competence she had honed over decades. He felt something at those events that was not pride exactly, it was more like recognition. This was what it was supposed to look like when resources met a real and honest purpose. He thought about Harlan at the back of that room. He thought about the kitchen table in the house outside of town. He thought about the conversation they had once had about the difference between building something that made you look important and building something that kept working after you were gone. Harlan had said, "Most things people spend their lives building are monuments. The ones that matter are the ones that keep being useful." Marcus had written that down too. He thought about the word "okay" in the lawyer's office. He thought about how it had been interpreted as calculation, as evidence of a scheme, as the cool response of someone who already knew the outcome. He had said it because it was the only word that had fit the moment, not triumph, not grief, not surprise, but a simple settling into the fact of something real. Okay, this is what is true. Now I have to think about what to do with what is true. That was still his orientation. He had not changed in that way. He was still fundamentally a person who looked at what was real and tried to figure out what to do with it honestly. In October, Gerald called. Not emailed, called. Marcus answered, and his father's voice was on the other end, and it was different from any of the other versions Gerald had deployed since January. It was not formal or prepared or armored. It was simply tired in the particular way of a man who has been carrying something he is not sure he knows how to set down. Gerald said he had been doing a lot of thinking. He said he had been unfair. He said he had looked back at the way things had been in the house when the boys were growing up, and he did not like what he saw. He said he thought he had prioritized certain things in Elliot because Elliot was more like him, and he thought that had cost Marcus something, and he was sorry. He said he was not saying any of this because of the money. He said he knew Marcus probably could not be sure of that, and he understood if Marcus chose not to believe him, but he wanted to say it anyway because it was true. Marcus sat with this for a long time. He said, "I believe you, Dad." Gerald said, "I don't expect things to go back to how they were." Marcus said, "They probably won't, but they can be something real instead of something managed." Gerald was quiet for a moment, then he said, "I'd like that." They talked for 40 minutes, not about money, not about the estate or the foundation or Elliot's business or any of the practical stakes that had been swirling through the year. They talked about Gerald's own father, who Marcus had never met, and who Gerald described as a man very similar to the way Marcus had felt in that house, someone who was there without being fully seen. They talked about what Gerald had hoped for when he became a father himself. They talked about what had gotten in the way of those hopes. It was the most honest conversation Marcus had ever had with his father, and it happened on an October afternoon when neither of them had anything to gain from it except the conversation itself. After they hung up, Marcus sat in the room he used for foundation work and looked at his notebook. He had Harlan's habit of writing things down, though his were less philosophical observations and more practical notes. But that evening he wrote something that was not practical at all. He wrote, "A person can spend their whole life being the one who makes room and never being given any. The hardest thing is not getting out. The hardest thing is remembering that making room for yourself is not the same as taking something from someone else." He looked at what he had written, then he added one more line. "Harlan knew that. He was trying to tell me all along." The year closed in the way years do, not with a clean resolution, because life does not operate on that kind of narrative, but with a different kind of ground under Marcus's feet than the ground that had been there in January. His mother was in his life in a genuine way. His father was beginning to be. Elliot was distant but surviving, which was its own outcome. The foundation was operational and growing. The estate was fully transferred and being managed with the kind of care and intentionality that Harlan had spent years believing Marcus was capable of. Marcus Reid was 31 years old at the start of this year and 32 by the end. He had inherited $7 billion and lost and partially recovered his family in the same 12 months. He had not become someone else. He had not let the money or the pain or the accusations or the loneliness of those early weeks convince him that the story being told about him was the true one. He had said the one honest word that started everything okay, and he had meant it. Okay, this is real. Now what do I do with what is real? And he had done what he always did. He had shown up. He had been careful. He had been honest. He had kept the visits in his way to the things and people that were worth showing up for. That had been Harlan's lesson, delivered over 15 years of kitchen table afternoons. It had been the whole point, not the money, the practice of showing up and being real. Marcus Reid had always been the one who showed up. He just had not always been in a position where showing up changed anything visible. Now he was, and he intended to keep going. Before you close this out, I want you to sit with one thing that Marcus Reid carried through this entire story. He did not win by being louder than the people who doubted him. He did not win by proving them wrong in some dramatic public way. He won by staying exactly himself through every version of pressure they sent his way, at the dinner table, on the phone, in that lawyer's office, in the silence that followed. If there is someone in your life who has made you feel like your presence was not worth as much as someone else's, or like your relationships were secretly transactions, I want you to tell me in the comments how you handled it. Did you stay quiet? Did you speak up? Did you walk away? Or did you find a way to just keep showing up on your own terms? Leave it down there. Marcus Reid's story is not the only one that matters in this room.